Welcome to this video demonstration on disability assessment in India in 2024. I use my spreadsheets where all the guidelines mentioned in the Gazette of March 2024 are included. You can watch this video in your mobile and simultaneously start your laptop or PC and follow every steps at the same time as I show. You can pause and play many times in between so that you understand every bit of it. Okay, now pause this video and start your Windows computer. And then play the video. I think you have started your computer by now. First, let us prepare where to download the files. Right-click on your desktop, select the menu named New, and then click the menu folder. Name it as APPI. APPI is short form of Assessment of PPI or Permanent Physical Impairment. Right-click on APPI folder to open the File Explorer. Create a subfolder named Original inside the APPI folder. This is the place to download the unaltered and original files from my website. Let us visit my website www.rammedisoft.com. Don't try the Google search, which is shown here. It is a different box. It may give confusing results as shown here. You will not understand where to go if you follow Google search. Instead, you should only use URL box. Let me type URL of my website directly in the URL box and click the Enter key to go to my website without Google search. This is my permanent website, and to explore and download files, you don't need any registration. In my website, I have a master download page regarding disability assessment. Instead of the above steps, you can go to this page directly with another method. For that, use the short URL da.rammedisoft.com to go to that page. Open your browser and type the short URL da.rammedisoft.com. It goes to the master download page in my website. In the URL box, just see the full and long URL of this appi.html page. In this page, you can see all download links, listed one below other. At the top I have links to download XLSX files. And then you can see these links to 3 YouTube videos. I have explained in detail the history, theory, and the practice of disability assessment in these videos. At the bottom of the page, I have the link to download the full Gazette of 827 pages and short version of 26 pages. You can click on any links and download files from here, one by one. No registration is needed for downloading any files from my website. I will show you another and an easier method to download 26-page Gazette. Let me type the shortcut URL dagaz.rammedisoft.com. That downloads the 26-page PDF file of Gazette 2024. Move the downloaded file from Windows Downloads folder to Original folder. Open it to see the Gazette. It has only the selected 26 pages regarding the assessment of disability in musculoskeletal system, that too only upper and lower limbs and spine. Other pages are not included. If you want, you can download the full Gazette from the master download page. It has 800 plus pages. Now, let us check the general features of Gazette 2024 in the 26-page version. Please note, the basics of calculation did not change much since 1981. I have used the same words and methods exactly as they appear in Gazette in my spreadsheets. Always, the first part of disability assessment, whether it is upper limb or lower limb, deals with the calculation of summary impairment. The steps end up in a 90-based ratio in percentage. The second part is calculation of complications or additional weightages or extra points. Maximum value for additional weightages allowed is 10% of impairment. Dominant hand and shortening does not have this limit. Both the values, namely the value of the summary impairment and that of the additional weightage, are added to get the disability with respect to the limb being examined. Gazette 2024 is mainly guidelines. Section A.1 is about upper extremity and starts in page 456. Section A.2 is about lower extremity and starts in page 459. In both of the above sections, note that they have mentioned percentages for every complication possible. Actually, what these percentages are of? Gazette says these are the percentages of impairment. I call this as the fifth rule. We are going to discuss about this rule later on. Other important part of Gazette 2024 is Appendix 2, starting on page 524. In this Appendix 2, you can find the Form A in the pages from 524 to 527. This form is called Assessment Proforma for Upper Extremity. Actually, you can take a print out of this Form A and fill the correctly graded signs and symptoms in the right side and left side columns from top to bottom while examining the victim. Then you have to sit with a calculator and start filling the remaining columns, calculating step by step from left to right and from top to bottom. By the time you complete filling of the form correctly and sequentially, you will get the final disability. Just be careful with Gazette's Form A and Form B. There are some errors and the steps are not obvious. Gazette gives Form B in the pages from 527 to 528. This form is called Assessment Proforma for Lower Extremity. It is also a part of Appendix 2. As mentioned before, if you fill the blanks in these forms correctly and do appropriate calculations, you will get the disability at the end. I have used exactly the same sequence of recording and calculations in my spreadsheets so that none of the rules are violated. The missing items are added and the steps of calculations are included. In Appendix 3 in page 529, Gazette gives the list of active range of motion along with the planes. They were earlier called as arcs of movements for each joint. This table is called Average Normal Range of Motion in degrees. I have taken all these same values and incorporated them in my spreadsheets. Finally, in page 466, amputations and direct impairments are listed in section C under locomotor disability. What are the most important things we have to know? Well, from Gazette 2024. 8 keywords and 5 rules are the most important things you have to know from Gazette 2024. If you understand and memorize the keywords and the flowcharts, you can understand Gazette 2024. I have listed the keywords and rules in this picture. They are available in the References tab in both the spreadsheets, which I am going to explain later. People always ask what is new in this Gazette. Not much has changed. 40% weightage for hand in AROM division of the hand component, which was introduced in 2018, is remaining as such. It was conceptually difficult to include in the spreadsheet, as it was difficult to know how much weightage should be given to AROM of each finger. But we managed to solve it amicably. I will explain that later with examples. Activities are given scales to measure by. But the scales ranging from 0 to 9 are different for the upper and lower limbs. Now the activities are included separately in Form A and Form B, and for lower limb, Gazette shows 10 activities of 9% each instead of 9 activities of 10% each previously. How to mention about the disability in certificate is repeated many times, showing its importance. Always the disability is expressed with respect to the section of the locomotor system, never to the whole body. This is another new feature in Gazette 2024. I would like you to take note of. If more than one disability is present in a person, it is called composite disability. The values are 100-based ratios. The ordinary combining formula is used to combine two 90-based values and is not to be used for composite disability. This welcome change in Gazette 2024 has corrected that. You can see here the number 90 is replaced by 100. Rest of the calculations are same. It again results in a maximum value, always just less than 100. Main uses for us are, in the cases of bilateral involvement, if upper and lower limb are involved in the same victim or if spine is involved with a limb or limbs. Let us have a brief look at my spreadsheets now regarding a new feature. It is the solution to the implementation dilemma of the rule number 5. In my spreadsheet, on popular demand, just before dealing with the complications, I have made provisions to opt for either relative 10% or absolute 10% for additional weightages or extra points. You are going to select one of those according to your choice of whether you believe extra points are percentages of impairment or not. If you agree with rule number 5, you have to select the option relative 10%. Otherwise, you have to select absolute 10%. If you do not understand this point, don't worry. Later on, I am going to explain this in detail with examples. That is a brief description of what is in the Gazette of 2024 and what is new. Let us come back to the process of downloading of files other than Gazette 2024. They are 2 spreadsheets and 3 Docx files. I have created a zip file with all these 5 different files in it. Let us download this zip file. You have to do this only once. Unless you lose them, you do not have to do this again. Shortcut URL for the zip file is zip.rammedisoft.com. Cut the downloaded zip file from Windows Downloads folder and paste it into original folder. Right-click on the zip file. Select the menu to extract the files. Alter the path of the output folder to extract all the files directly into original folder. Click to complete extraction. You have 5 new extracted files now. There are 3 Docx files and 2 XLSX files. Delete the zip file. You don't need it again. Let me open the certificate format.docx file in Microsoft Word. Let me add my header to the certificate. To make this fast, I have already typed it elsewhere. Let me copy the header from there. Now the certificate is ready for the next case. Similarly, edit other affidavits to suit your needs and keep ready for the next case. Change the original affidavits, maybe few times, as and when you find problems during cross-examination in your MVC cases. After that, you don't have to make much changes in the original affidavits. For example, let me create an affidavit for upper limb from the existing affidavit. Let me copy the affidavit upper limb and lower limb. Let me rename it as upper limb affidavit. Let me open the file in MS Word and edit it. It is somewhat ready for the next patient for our quotes here. Now, here is a very important point. You have to do this only once. And you don't have to download files again and again, unless you have lost the files, or a new Gazette has come, or your hard drive has crashed completely. You can also transfer these original files to your Google Drive as a backup and keep them safe. When a new case comes, first you will create a new folder. Then, copy only the required files to this new folder. Change the copied file according to your need. Mostly filling the blanks would be enough. However, new affidavit always need many more changes. This procedure sounds very clear and simple, isn't it? Let us see an example. Let us imagine that a new patient, Mr. DEF, has come for disability assessment. Here is his short case sheet. His register number is 34567. He has post-traumatic stiffness of the right elbow joint. For each new patient, like this Mr. DEF, we have to create a new subfolder inside the APEI folder. So, now let me create a new subfolder. Rename the new folder as DEF 34567. When you have hundreds of folders and files, this register number and the victim's name in the folder name helps to quickly find the files later, in case you need it later. Go back to the original folder. Copy the upper limb affidavit, certificate proforma and UL to 024.xlsx file. Go to the folder DEF 34567. Paste the just copied files. Rename the XLSX file to elbow 34567.xlsx. I have typed elbow to allow me to search for these files later and sort by the regions of the body. Now, let me open this elbow.xlsx file in Microsoft Office Excel. You can see that these programs are best operated in computers or laptops, mainly because of large screens and ease of scrolling and keyboard entries. Now, let us learn a little bit about the spreadsheets. All spreadsheet files have their data arranged in rows and columns. Blue rectangle on the top in this picture contains the names of the columns mentioned as A, B, C, D, E, etc. Green rectangle on the left in this picture contains the names of the rows mentioned as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. Then, at the position E3, I have marked a single cell in an orange rectangle. Cells like this are the places where you make entries. Or these are the points where you type in the data. You can enter text or numbers in these cells. But only some designated cells allow data entry. Sometimes, in a cell there will be a drop-down list and you have to select one value from that list. For example, in the data entry form worksheet, for the cell designated for dominant extremity, you can choose between yes or no. Another example is selecting between the options, relative 10% or absolute 10%. However, you cannot enter data in other cells, which display the labels or results of calculations or out-of-the-page cells. This process of prevention of entries is called locking. You can see that a single spreadsheet file can hold many parts or tabs. These are called worksheets. Each of my spreadsheet has 5 tabs or worksheets within it. The 5 worksheets are Manual Entry Form, Data Entry Form, Form A or Form B, Flowchart, and References. Clicking on a tab opens the worksheet associated with that label. You can see that I am clicking on tabs and associated worksheets are getting opened. These worksheets are locked so that you can make entries only in the required places. Only some cells in the data entry form, where you have to enter the observed value for right and left limbs, are not locked. All other cells and labels are locked. If you try to type outside, you get an error message like this. Locking makes the working with the sheets simple and error or hazard free. None of the locks in my spreadsheets are password protected. However, I strongly advise you not to open the locks. If you know this much, it is more than enough. You are good to go. Before ending this section, let us recollect what all we did till now. We created a simple folder tree on desktop by creating a PPI folder and one original subfolder inside it. We visited Disability Assessment Master download page using the URL da.ramedisoft.com. We downloaded 26-page version of Disability Assessment related Gazette using the URL dagaz.ramedisoft.com. Downloaded the zip file using the URL zip.ramedisoft.com. Extracted the files and edited some files. For a new patient, we created a new folder. Renamed it correctly with the name of the patient and the register number of the patient. We copied relevant files from original folder to the new folder. We renamed the XLSX file with the region of the body affected and the register number of the patient. Simple, accurate, and reproducible. Isn't it? Now, let us go back to the XLSX file of this previously described elbow case. You can see that I am in the last worksheet called References. Let me click the first worksheet. That opens the manual entry form. All the cells in this form are locked. If you try to type in, you get message like this. That means the whole form is not editable, because it is meant for direct printing and to be written on and to be used after printing. Actually, this form is just a list of all the features to be tested, in this case for upper limb. Let us take a printout of this form. It looks like this. Now, for practice, in this case of Mr. DF, with registration number 34567, let us write on this printed form. Let me first write the identifiers and then clinical features. This victim has post-traumatic stiffness of right elbow joint after RTA. Let us assume that I have filled the form while examining the patient on the bedside. As per Gazette, generally I use goniometer, tape and a ballpoint pen to test sensation. In addition, I keep a hand dynamometer, a cup, one 4-inch ball, one 1-inch ball, one 4-inch pipe, one 1-inch pipe, one key bunch, one thick shoelace, and one clothes bag to test hand functions. I use the corridor, steps and ramp in my clinic to test walking. We always start examination by asking the patient to move one joint at a time voluntarily. That is called active range of motion or AROM. This patient had 10 degrees of flexion extension and 40 degrees of supination and 40 degrees of pronation at the elbow joint. Note that we are entering the observed values as such. That means we are not entering the losses. Active range of motion was normal in other joints. Power was 3 out of 5 in all the 4 muscle groups in the elbow. Here note that normal value is 5 and you enter the observed values directly. Again, we are not entering the losses. Let us start filling the coordinated activities, as shown here. Though some of the activities are mildly affected, I have to grade them as 3 out of 9 or mildly affected. Note that only 0, 3, 5, 7 and 9 grades are allowed. There is no grading in between. It is mentioned in the form. That means here you are entering the actual losses directly. In the additional weightages, I have marked it as dominant hand. He had a thick keloid scar on the front of the elbow, so I gave 3% for this superficial complication. Patient also had fixed flexion deformity of 35 degree, so I gave 3% for that also. That means, here also we are entering the losses directly. See, I just finished filling and the form looks like this, with entries in all the relevant features. This form is not meant for calculations. It is only for record purpose or practice purpose, and you can file it with the case sheet if needed. As I told you, I did no calculations. We are just going to use this filled up form in the next step. Please note this point. This step is entirely optional. It is for the beginners. I mean, this step of bedside recording of clinical features, by writing in the form, is optional. It is useful till you get used to the process. In addition, it proves that you have indeed examined the patient. Once you are experienced, you can enter the clinical findings in the data entry form in the computer directly. I am going to explain it soon. Before that, let us keep in mind these 3 important points. Point number 1 is, in the AROM and muscle strength divisions, you have to directly enter the observed values, whereas in the activities and additional weightage section you have to enter the losses directly after grading. Point number 2 is, disability assessment is incomplete if you have not examined all the activities and complications. I have checked the coordinated activities and all complications in this case. Point number 3 is grading of activities and complications according to loss-based scale mentioned for the given feature and for the given limb. That is why I have graded the coordinated activities according to the loss-based scale, where we give higher grade for higher loss. I have noted the additional weightage of dominant hand and then graded both the complication and deformity. While I was doing my PG in BJ Medical College in Pune, whenever a victim used to come for disability assessment, physiotherapists used to write findings similar to this. Then our professor used to calculate the disability. We were not required to do that. So, we did not bother to learn also. So many times I have felt that I would have benefited greatly if I got some training at that time. Now, we know which are the clinical features we have to test, quantify, or measure, or grade for the assessment of disability in 2024. This is the best stage to learn the flowchart, so that you will come across some keywords. Let us see the worksheet, named as flowchart in the upper limb XLSX file. In this worksheet we learn about the topographical keywords, like components, divisions, activities, groups and complications or additional weightages. We also come across statistical keywords like combining formula in this flowchart. You can see that the upper limb features are arranged at the top level, in arm component and hand component. In the arm component, we have 3 divisions. active range of motion division or AROM division, muscle strength division and coordinated activities division. In active range of motion division, there are 4 joints, namely shoulder, elbow, wrist and hand with 20, 20, 10 and 40% weightage respectively. In the muscle strength division there are 3 joints, shoulder, elbow and wrist, each with 30% weightage. In the coordinated activities division, there are 10 activities with a maximum loss of 9% in each activity. Once you examine all the 3 divisions, the divisional values are summarized using combining formula twice to get the value of the arm component. From the arm component, let us move to hand component. In the hand component, we have 3 groups, namely prehension group, sensation group and strength group. Losses in these groups are summed up directly to get the total value of the hand component. The values of arm and hand component are summarized using combining formula to get summary value of impairment. Then additional weightages for involvement of dominant hand, shortening, deformity, pain, loss of sensation in arm component and complications are calculated. Final disability is obtained by adding the summary value of impairment and additional weightages. In the lower limb spreadsheet, let us see the flow chart. Here, the measurements are arranged into components like that in the upper limb. They are called mobility component and stability component. The mobility component has 2 divisions, namely active range of motion division and muscle strength division. The clinical features in these divisions are examined like those in the upper limb. The stability component has 10 activities, which are to be graded. And the values are directly added to get the value for the stability component. The values of the mobility component and stability component are combined using combining formula to get the summary of impairment. Next, the applicable additional weightages or complications are graded and processed. In lower limb, we call them as extra points. The total of all these processed complications is added to the previously calculated summary of impairment to get disability with respect to that lower limb. We understood the topographic keywords, namely components, divisions, groups, and complications. Complications are called additional weightages in the case of upper limb and extra points in the case of lower limb. We have to learn the statistical keywords, namely percentage loss, mean percentage loss, weightage, combining formula and telescopic combining. We are going to do that in the next topic. We also have to learn the 5 rules of disability assessment in the next topic. Next, let me take the previously printed and filled up manual entry form to my computer and enter those values in the data entry form in the Excel SX file. For that, click on the second label. That opens the data entry form worksheet. I call this worksheet as score sheet of disability. This worksheet has 5 pages in the case of upper limb. For lower limb, the data entry form has 4 pages. At the top of the form, let us fill the patient details as shown here. These will appear in every page of the worksheet. The same details also get copied to Form A automatically. We will cover the Form A in the next step. Below the identifiers, we see the active range of motion division at the top. At the top, we have the shoulder joint, and below that, we have the elbow joint. Let me enter the observed values as 10, 40, and 40 in those cells. You can see the percentage losses getting calculated as you type. And then, you can see that the mean percentage loss is also being calculated. For example, in the flexion extension arc, the observed movement is 10 degrees. That is 10 out of 150 degree is available. The loss is 140 degree out of 150 degree. In percentages, the loss is 93.33%. Then we calculated the average of these three values, namely 93.33, 50 and 52.94. That is called mean percentage loss, and it came to 65.42%. Elbow has a weightage of 20% in active range of motion division. That means we have to take only 20% of 65.42%. That comes to 13.08%. All these calculations happen instantaneously and automatically every time you enter a value. So, finally a loss of 13.08% is seen in the elbow joint's movement. There was no loss movement in other joints. At this point some people ask, if there is fixed flexion deformity say of 35 degree and you find further active movement of 10 degrees, then what is the observed motion out of 150 degree? That is just like what has happened in this case. This patient had active range of movement of 35 to 45 degree in elbow. How do you calculate the loss and the percentage loss? Actually, we are interested only in the loss, in the active range of movement during the assessment of disability. Whatever is the point of start, we just have to take the range of movement remaining as the observed value. The loss is defined as what is not possible according to PM and R medicine. So, we enter the observed value as 10 degree. We can not put the observed value as 45 degree. In this case, other joints were normal. So, the total loss in the active range of motion division as well is 13.08%. At the right upper corner of all the pages, you can see the final disability changing as you enter every value. This helps you like a running commentary. Next comes the muscle strength division. Let me enter the values in the elbow joint. The power was 3 out of 5 in all the 4 groups. You can see the percentage loss and mean percentage loss and 30% weighted mean percentage loss being calculated instantaneously. Thus in elbow joint, the loss was 12%. There was no loss of power in other joints. Thus, the total loss in the muscle strength division is 12%. Some people ask how to grade power in case of bony ankylosis. It would be 0. Even if the power is there, it is of no use for the function of the joint. Let us move to the coordinated activities division and enter the values from the printed form. Let us start filling the coordinated activities as shown here. Note that only 0, 3, 5, 7 and 9 grades are allowed. It is mentioned in the form. Because of that reason, though some of the activities are mildly affected, I have to grade them as 3 out of 9, thought it was only 1% or 2% as there is no grading in between. Note that here you are entering the actual losses directly. In this case, the total loss in coordinated activities division is 26%. At the end of the arm component, the values were automatically arranged in descending order. In this case you can see that first the loss in the coordinated activities, then the muscle strength loss, and finally the active range of motion loss being listed one below the other. The value of the arm component is calculated after applying the combining formula twice. In other words, this is combining in two stages. In the first stage, highest two values are combined using the combining formula. Then the resulting value is combined with the lowest value using the same formula. This process is also known as telescopic combining. This process, which we are calling as combining, is totally different from the process of simple addition, which we learnt in the primary school. This formula is called combining formula. It is based on the law of diminishing returns. What it takes are two 90-based values, and what it gives is a 90-based value. The word combining formula is a favorite of judges and advocates. In simple terms, it gives the summary value of the two 90-based ratios. It denotes the addition of higher value A to the B by 90th of remaining value in 90. The remaining value is 90 minus A. The formula is A plus B by 90 into 90 minus A, where A is the higher value and B is the lower value. For example, if two values to be combined are 60 and 40, the resultant value becomes 73.33. You can note here, by systematic calculation, maximum value of both A and B would limit to 90%, and maximum result you can get as output also can never exceed 90. Well, you need not remember these nuances. Just remember the formula. There are a number of places in Gazette where this formula is discussed. We are concerned with following 5 situations. Number 1 is, we use combining formula as telescopic combining at different places when you have to combine more than two 90-based ratios. Number 2 is, to combine the value of the first and second components in the case of both the upper and lower limbs. As I mentioned above, there is another version of combining formula mentioned in Gazette 2024. It is called Composite combining formula. It is used to combine the values of 100-based ratios, like disability of two parts. We use the composite combining formula in following situations. Number 1 is, to combine values in bilateral involvement. Number 2 is, in the cases of multiple locomotor involvement. Here, we use composite combining formula to combine the values of two or more values of limbs, plus or minus that of spine. Number 3 is, in polytrauma cases, where we use composite combining formula to combine the values of losses in multiple systems in telescopic fashion. If you do not use the word composite, combining formula means the original 90-based formula we discussed in the spreadsheet till now. Let us come back to the 90-based combining formula we were discussing just now. For example, as mentioned just now, before combining the 3 divisions of the arm component of upper limb, we have to arrange the values in a descending order. And then we are going to apply the combining formula twice. Let me repeat. In the present case, in the first stage, value of coordinated activities was combined with the value of muscle strength. The resulting value, in the next stage, was combined with the loss in the active range of motion division, which had the least value among the 3. Thus, we got a loss of 42.59% in the arm component. Here, everything was automatically arranged, formula got applied, and the final values were calculated. Everything happened automatically. Though you get the calculations automatically, the most important thing is, you should know all the steps and be ready to explain the process exactly as described in Gazette during cross-examination. In the present case, let us go down to the hand component. There was no loss. Then we go for combining of the arm and hand component. That comes at the top of the 5th page in the data entry form as shown here. So on combining the value of the arm component with that of the hand component resulted in same value as that of arm component. That is because there were no losses in the hand component. Here, A was 42.59% and B was 0%. That is why the summary impairment in this case is calculated as 42.59%. Let us take a small break from this spreadsheet and learn about the 5 rules mentioned in Gazette 2024. These rules are not listed together, but are dispersed throughout the Gazette. Rule number 1. Maximum disability allowed is 100% and it should be a whole number. Page 457. Rule number 2. Deal with dominant hand and shortening first, page 458 and page 460. Rule number 3. All complications or additional weightages are to be graded properly as described, page 459 and page 460. Rule number 4. Maximum additional weightages allowed is 10% excluding dominant hand and shortening, page 460. Rule number 5. Extra points are percentages of impairment, which is mentioned in page 460. All these rules are obvious except for the last rule. Suppose there is a case in which you have calculated the impairment as 40% in upper limb and it is in the dominant hand. What is the disability? According to rule number 5, all the complications or additional weightages are percentages of impairment. In this case, dominant hand has 10% designated. 10% of 40% is 4%. Add 4 to 40, you get 44 as the final disability. Suppose there is severe pain the right hand of a person, but he has no impairment in both the hand and arm components. What is the disability? According to rule number 5, if there is no impairment, then there also would be no additional weightages allowed. There are controversies regarding the interpretation of the verses from the Gazette. We will learn about these rules and controversies as we go down the data entry worksheet and make entries in the additional weightage section. First, we have to decide our approach to deal with the additional weightages. Depending on whether you are following the rule number 5 or not, we can have two approaches, namely relative 10% approach and absolute 10% approach. I prefer relative 10% approach. Here, we follow the rule number 5. That is, we consider that the extra points are percentages of impairment. There will be maximum 10% cutoff indirectly. We will be excluding dominant hand and shortening from the relative 10% cutoff. The other approach, called absolute 10% approach, means you just add the percentages to impairment with 10% cutoff directly, excluding dominant hand and shortening from the absolute 10% cutoff. That is against rule number 5. I follow rule number 5. Because that is how I was trained by seniors and professors. So, I don't endorse absolute 10% approach. I prefer relative 10%. That is why, in this case, I selected relative 10%. Note that this cell, showing your approach, does not appear in any printouts if you use LibreOffice Calc. After selecting the approach, let us enter the additional weightages of this case. Dominant hand is set to yes. I have given 3% for superficial complications and 3% for deformity in functional position. For dominant hand, 10% was applied on the impairment of 42.59%. That comes to 4.26%. Note that the 10% cutoff does not apply to the value for dominant hand. For other complications together, the percentage is 6%. As it is less than 10%, the 10% cutoff rule is not applicable. This 6% was applied on impairment of 42.59%. That comes to 2.56%. The total additional weightage, including the dominant hand, becomes 6.81%. Final disability is calculated as 42.59% impairment, 4.26% for dominant hand and 2.56% for other complications. Thus, the total disability is 49% with respect to right upper limb. That finishes the disability assessment of this case. However, if you don't agree with rule number 5, it means that, according to you, the percentages for additional weightages are absolute. In that case, you have to change the option to absolute 10%. Let us see what happens when we do like that. Dominant hand gets full 10%. Other complications directly and together get 6%. However, it is less than 10%, so that cutoff becomes not applicable. Total additional weightage becomes 16%. Total disability changes to 59%. In the relative 10% approach, it was 49%. As I told you before, it is your choice. But I prefer relative 10% approach because I follow the fifth rule. Presently we are in the data entry form. Let us click on the third tab, labeled as Form A. Form A is for upper limb and Form B is for lower limb. These forms are designed exactly as given in the Gazette. I have also included the missing steps of calculation for the ease of understanding. In addition, in my Form A, I have included active range of motion of hand, which is not given in Gazette's Form A. These forms are locked, that means you cannot make any entries in these forms directly. They are meant to be directly printed and automatically get filled up as you make entries in the data entry forms. There is no need to type again. Following is the printout of Form A of this case of elbow ankylosis. Page 1 looks like this and contains identifiers section. You can take the signature or thumb impression of the patient on this first page. Page 2 looks like this and contains the arm component. You can see the final value of the arm component here as 42.59%. That is the result of telescopic combining of the three divisions, namely active range of motion division, muscle strength division and coordinated activities division. Page 3 looks like this and contains the hand component. You can see that there are no losses in the hand component as it was normal. At the bottom, you can see the summary value of impairment for the upper limb as 42.59%. That is the result of combining of the arm and the hand components. Page 4 looks like this and contains additional weightages in relative 10% approach. That means I am following the rule number 5. The weightage due to dominant hand is 10% of impairment, that is 10% of 42.59%, resulting in a value of 4.26%. Other additional weightages together is 6% of impairment, that is 6% of 42.59%, resulting in a value of 2.56%. As it was less than 10% cutoff, that value was accepted as such. Final disability is calculated as 42.59% with respect to right upper extremity. So, in effect we made only 18 entries in the data entry form worksheet. With that, you saw that the Form A got filled up automatically, which has 4 pages. Depending on the court or your experience in the court, you can take printout of either the data entry form or print the Form A or Form B. Form A and Form B are Gazette friendly, whereas data entry form or score sheet is explanation friendly. The last worksheet we have not yet covered is labeled as references. This worksheet is same in both the upper and the lower limb spreadsheets. You can take a printout of this worksheet and go through each sentence carefully. This sheet has a lot of useful information and download links. If you click on the web links on the spreadsheet, you can directly download relevant documents using a browser. Other things covered are medical versus legal disability, the question of whole body sections A, B, and C of Gazette, and multiple disabilities. In the second page of this worksheet, we have the list of the definitions, keywords, and rules. And at the end of the page, I have a ready-made paragraph for examination in chief or affidavit to be given in the courts. It is a standard reusable paragraph, applicable to both upper and lower limbs. This paragraph explains the process of disability assessment you followed to get the final disability in simple and abridged format. You can copy the paragraph to the affidavit or examination in chief in MVC cases and fill the blanks, so that if the court asks you how did you assess the disability, you can look at the paragraph and reply. Let us see how to do assessment of disability in the cases of hand injuries. People want to know how to calculate active range of motion of hand joints. Where is it given in Gazette? Actually, Gazette says nothing about it. We know active range of motion of hand is given in a table in Appendix 3 in page 529. But how to incorporate that in active range of motion division in arm component is not given. We know that the hand has 5 fingers and each finger has 3 joints. But we also know that, or taught so many times that, the loss of movement in all the fingers is not equal. Each finger has its own importance, or there should be a ray-wise weightage. For example, if 100% of motion of thumb is lost in one case, and 100% of motion of little finger is lost in another case, how do you compare? Are they equal? Or, in other words, if hand is 100%, how much of hand is a thumb ray? And how much of hand is a little finger ray? After reading the Gazette many times, I looked at the list of amputations in page 466, which mentions PTI in the cases of amputations. Here at line number 10 you can see that the amputation through carpal bones is 55. Further down, we have the list for ray amputations. Total of all ray amputation is equal to 55. Now it became obvious. We know that the amputation percentages of fingers consider the loss of all tissues and all the functions of the fingers. So, the loss of AROM of fingers also should be in the same ratios of these amputation percentages. For simplicity, let us consider the value of hand as 55 as mentioned in the table of amputations. It becomes the denominator. That means if hand is 55, thumb has a value of 30 out of 55 of the hand. And the little finger has a value of 2 out of 55 of the hand. So, I devised a list of ray-wise weightages as shown here. For checksum, if you draw a 55-based pie chart, the values or percentages for all the fingers fit into a full and complete circle. For your reference, I have included these images in the flowchart worksheet in the lower part as shown here. Now let us take a case of 100% loss of movement of thumb as the first example. Doing the calculations using the data entry form is very easy. Enter zeros for all AROM values of the thumb ray. You can see that there is a 100% mean percentage loss for thumb. Now the weightage of 30/55 for the loss in the thumb gets applied. It becomes 54.55%. All other fingers are normal, so have no losses. At the end of the hand AROM section, the hand weightage of 40% gets applied on it, resulting in a value of 21.82%. At the end of the whole of the AROM division, add the weighted losses of all the joints. In this case, other joints, namely shoulder, elbow, and wrist, are not involved. So, we will get 21.82% loss in the active range of motion division of arm component. Actually, it is more than what is allowed for shoulder or elbow and double of that of wrist. That shows the importance given to hand, especially the thumb, in the AROM division of the arm component. You can see that I have just entered the values in the movement division only. I have not entered values in the coordinated activities division, and I have not even touched the hand component and additional weightages in which the loss of AROM of thumb produce lot of losses. That means the thumb is indeed very important in hand, and the hand is the most important part of upper limb. Let us look at this case of industrial accident involving one Mr. ABC with post-traumatic right little finger stiffness, in slight flexion, in MP and in the both IP joints. This is his manual entry form, completed in the OPD. Let us make the entries in the data entry form. As you have rightly guessed, here we have a 100% mean percentage loss of motion in the little finger. Little finger has a weightage of 2 out of 55. So, the mean percentage loss of 100 is multiplied by 2 by 55 to get the value of little finger with respect to whole hand. That become 3.64% of the hand. Other fingers in the hand are not affected. That means the movement loss in hand is 3.64% in this case. Now, the hand joint has a 40% weightage in the AROM division of the arm component. 40% of 3.64% becomes 1.46%. As other joints in the movement division were not affected, 1.46% is the loss in the whole AROM division of the arm component. Further, the matter becomes more interesting, as this stiff finger has effect not only in AROM division, but also in coordinated activities division and in the groups in hand component. Let us enter the losses in the coordinated activities division. In this case, you can see the losses in coordinated activities division is 6%. And at the end of the arm component, the losses in the divisions are arranged in descending order, and the combining formula is applied. You can see that there was no strength loss in the arm component. So in this case, the combining formula is applied only once, resulting in a value of 7.36%. Let us see the hand component of this patient. He had loss of opposition to little finger. And he had losses in prehension, while trying to hold 1-inch diameter spherical and cylindrical objects and lifting a bag with 10 kilograms weight, all because of the stiff little finger. His grip strength was 18 out of 20 and pinch was graded as 8 out of 10. So the total loss in the hand component was 9%. Then the arm and hand components need combining. That resulted in a value of 15.62%, which is also known as summary impairment. Now we have to deal with the additional weightages. Before that, let me declare my approach to additional weightages as relative 10% because I follow rule number 5. Then I selected yes for dominant hand, which resulted in 1.56%. Then I entered 3% for pain and 3% for full thickness heavy scar on the front of the little finger, which together resulted in 0.94%, which is below the 10% cutoff. Total additional weightage became 2.5%. Final disability in this case was calculated as 18% with respect to right upper limb. In absolute 10% approach, he would have had 16% additional weightage and total disability of 32%. So, your interpretation of rule number 5 does matter. If it had been an amputation through the head of metacarpal or disarticulation of MP joint of little finger, how to calculate the disability? This example teaches us the whole picture of assessment of disability in just 4 slides. Let us look at this table at page number 466. Impairment would be 2% PPI with some rules. What exactly is this table showing? The table is giving permanent physical impairment or PPI, not disability. So the disability is impairment plus additional weightages. If there are additional weightages, you have to calculate them and add them to impairment to get the disability. What are the rules for amputations? The rules are given in the same page. Number 1 rule is, in the cases of multiple amputations, you have to use the combining formula to get the summary impairment. That means the values given in the table are 90 based. That means the remaining 10% has to come from additional weightages, if applicable. That is just like the assessment of other injuries. Now comes the rule number 5, which states that extra points or additional weightages are percentages of impairment, if you accept that rule, given in the page number 460. In this case of amputation, the dominant hand gets 10% extra, and inability to fix the prosthesis gets 5% extra. They are mentioned before the other complications. So these 2 additional weightages are exempted from the rules which apply to the other additional weightages. You can see the point C given here. It states that any complication in the form of stiffness of proximal joint, neuroma, infection, etc. should be given up to a total of 10% additional weightage. That means there is a cutoff of 10% for these complications. Let us apply the rules to the present case of disarticulation through the MP joint of little finger of right hand. In this case, the dominant hand gets 10% and inability to fix the prosthesis gets 5%. Suppose there is neuroma and infection in this case. That would be another maximum 10%. According to relative 10% approach, which means that I am following rule number 5, 10% for dominant hand gets applied over the 2% PPI and results in 0.2%. Similarly, other additional weightages are dealt with. Final value would be 2.5% in that case. In absolute 10% approach, this disarticulation would have had 10% for dominant hand, 5% for inability to fix the prosthesis, 10% additional weightage for neuroma and infection. The absolute values are directly added to the impairment, and the total disability can go up to 27%. I follow the rule number 5, which says that the extra points are percentages of impairment. I find that literally, ethically and statistically correct. So it is true that amputated finger is far less disabling than the stiff reimplanted painful finger, whatever is your approach to rule number 5. What about the disability assessment for lower limb? The workflow is essentially the same as in the case of upper limb. In the case of lower limb, we use LL2024.XLSX file for disability assessment. This patient had only 85 degrees flexion out of 135 degrees and 0 degree extension out of 10 degrees, resulting in mean percentage loss of 68.52%. Then on application of 35% weightage, the value becomes summarized to 23.98%. In the muscle strength division, in the knee and ankle he had weakness, as shown in this picture, resulting in the summarized value of 15.43%. Combining the AROM and strength division resulted in a value of 35.30%. In the stability component, he had losses in various stability-related activities, as shown in this picture, resulting in a sum of 25%. After applying the combining formula, for the values of the mobility and stability components, the summary impairment was 50.49%. Before the assessment of extra points, let me choose my option of relative 10% as I follow rule number 5. Let me enter the shortening of 1.5 inches. For the first half inch of shortening, there are no extra points. For the remaining 1 inch, the extra points are 8%. In relative 10% approach, this 8% is applied over the impairment of 50.49%, resulting in the applicable extra points of 4.04%. Extra points for shortening do not have any cutoff. Patient had severe pain of 9% and chronic osteomyelitis with discharging sinus of 6% resulting in 15% extra points. After applying on the impairment of 50.49%, that results in the applicable extra points of 7.57%. But it is more than the 10% cutoff of 5.05%. So, only 5.05% is considered. Therefore, the final extra points are 4 plus 5.05, that is equal to 9.09%. That results in the disability of 59.58%, that gets rounded to 60%. However, if you do not follow rule number 5, you have to choose the absolute 10% approach. The extra points get applied directly and absolutely after 10% cutoff for complications, excluding shortening. You can see here, the final total extra points are 18%, resulting in a disability of 68%. So, your interpretation of rule number 5 makes some difference. That is about the lower limb disability assessment. What about the cases of bilateral involvement? Bilateral involvement is a case in which both the upper limbs or both the lower limbs are involved. In the case of bilateral involvement, single XLSX file is used, which is actually designed for both the limbs. And we have to enter observed values in the respective right and left columns in the same file. That is same in Form A and Form B, both. At the end, we get the disabilities for the left and right limbs separately. They are 100 based values. This is called composite disability. So the combining formula would change to 100 based system as shown here. This is one of the much needed welcome change in this Gazette of 2024. It has been implemented in my spreadsheets at the last step. For example, let us consider that the right lower limb has final disability of 59.58% and left lower limb 41.23%, then 100 based composite combining formula results in a value of 76. If we use 90 based combining formula as in 2018, the value would have been 74. According to me, all orthopedicians are very smart and can easily do these jobs without me explaining again. Only thing is, we have to see it once, that's all. After seeing some arguments in the courts of law and looking at the disability assessment by many doctors, I came across some strange and wrong methods. All of the following are wrong. Number 1. Checking only the few movements or power in few muscle groups and not calculating mean loss in each joint. The calculation should be methodical and sequential as shown in Form A and Form B. You have to calculate percentage loss for each feature and then mean percentage loss for each joint and then apply the weightage for the joint. This is compulsory in AROM division and in the muscle power division. All activities should be checked in both upper and lower limbs. Number 2. Checking only the movements and strength and declaring disability with some flimsy calculations. The calculation should be methodical and sequential as shown in Form A and Form B. All activities should be checked in both upper and lower limbs. Number 3. Not checking AROM of hand in arm component. Though Form A has omitted AROM of hand, it is not an excuse. You have to add the losses in AROM of hand if applicable in upper limb cases. Because hand has the maximum weightage, that is 40% in the division. Number 4. While testing activities, dividing the loss in each of the activities by 2 if the other limb is normal. Sir, where is it given? Form A and B has 2 columns throughout to record and calculate the losses on the right and the left limb separately. So there is no question of altering the observed value of one side because the other limb is not involved. For example, if you are testing writing in the right hand, score it according to scale and enter the observed value exactly as you graded it. If you are testing the left side, test the pen holding in that hand and score it according to scale and enter the observed value. How can you change the actual observed value on the right if the left side is not affected? Number 5. In cases of unilateral involvement, dividing the final value by 2. It is the most ridiculous thing and is not given anywhere. Form A and B has 2 columns throughout to record and calculate the losses on the right and the left limb. They are independent of each other. So, if only one limb is affected, it is to be assessed independently and completely. At the end there is no need to divide by 2. While certifying, you are going to certify the found value as applicable to the limb being affected. For example, if the right upper limb is affected and the disability is 29%, you would certify that so and so has a disability of 29% with respect to the right upper extremity. You cannot say 14.5% with respect to body. Gazette says the same at least 3 times as shown in this slide. Number 6. In cases of bilateral involvement, just adding the disabilities of right with the left limb is wrong. The values are to be combined and to be certified for upper or lower extremity as per the case. Here, make sure to use the composite disability combining formula, which is 100 based. Do that in telescopic fashion in the descending order as given in Gazette under multiple disabilities. Number 7. In case of multiple involvement, some doctors just add up the disabilities to give the final disability. For example, in a complex trauma, in which upper extremity plus lower extremity plus spine are involved, then values are arranged in descending order and telescopic combining is to be done. Here, make sure to use the composite disability combining formula, which is 100 based. Number 8. If a single limb is involved, dividing the disability by 2 or 3, or some fancy numbers, and declaring the disability for the whole body. This is also not given anywhere. And this is specifically banned by the Gazette. The calculation should be methodical and sequential, as shown in Form A and Form B. Doing that in order is the correct thing to do. And finally you would certify similar to so and so has a disability of 29% with respect to the right upper extremity. That is medical disability. Let the court decide the legal disability. Finally, we are at the end of this video. You can see that the disability assessment can be done very quickly and methodically using spreadsheets while still following each and every guideline given in Gazette 2024 and at the same time following all the steps. I hope this video becomes quite useful to both the young and experienced orthopedic surgeons during the assessment of disability, which is a non-orthopedic and untrained subject. Sorry for being nerdy. I could not have done better than this, because matter is not only related to orthopedics but mainly to the Department of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation. Anyhow, thanks for your patience. Bye-bye and have a nice day.